Funding for the production of Public Square provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, working to improve the lives of vulnerable children.
It is totally unacceptable in this country to have 50 million Americans hungry.
I'm just sick and tired of this. This got to stop.
People need to think in terms of that person 3 doors down from their house might not be getting a full meal at night. How as a society are we going to succeed economically if our students can't get a proper meal, if families can't feed the kids at the table?
Hunger knows no geographical boundaries.
We need to get back to a time of fairness in our society. What is economic justice?
Can we get more money? Is it possible?
I don't know that there's a bigger bucket out there.
Until there is a movement, there's a movement about Wall Street and the bankers and all that sort of thing. When it gets around to hunger, you're going to find more people by a factor of 100.
I think that we really need to evaluate our priorities, and it's going to start with these kinds of conversations.
Welcome to Public Square, where civic dialogue takes center stage, where real people come together with leaders to discuss and help solve important community issues.
We would hope that food pantries would only be a necessity in times of crisis, but unfortunately New Mexicans have been in a time of crisis for many, many years now.
Today our topic is hunger in New Mexico. Every day New Mexicans struggle to put food on the table. Hunger relief organizations say they serve more than 40,000 people every week, the equivalent of a city the size of Farmington. We wanted to talk to some of the folks who work in hunger relief to find out what they're doing to meet this need. So we invited Melody Wattenbarger from Roadrunner Food Bank, Lee Maynard of the Storehouse, Krista Kelly from the Collaboration to End Hunger, and David Whiteley with the Rio Grande Food Project. We also wanted to talk about poverty, the root cause of hunger. So we have a couple of experts on that topic, Ona Porter from Prosperity Works and Alicia Manzano from New Mexico Voices for Children. We'll also hear about what the federal and state government can do as we talk to Terry Bruner with the United States Department of Agriculture and state lawmakers Jimmy C. Hall and John Sapien. But before we get started, here's a little bit more about our topic.
Hunger is a symptom of a larger issue, which is poverty. And New Mexico ranks 49th in poverty in the nation, which is a huge problem.
Even when the economy was good, more and more people were slipping out of the middle class and into poverty. This is the worst that I've seen ever, and I'm really concerned that people are not going to bounce back.
Even though we came out with some better rankings as far as our food insecurity goes, the actual amount of food insecure New Mexicans has gone up in the last year.
I have a number of clients who have been laid off, who have lost their jobs, who are now find themselves struggling from just day-to-day existence and trying to put food on the table.
At the Rio Grande Food Project, we have seniors, we have children, we also have people who are employed whose paychecks just don't make it to the end of the month.
We scramble now to find enough food to feed everybody that comes into the storehouse.
There's a problem with hunger in every district. It's not just an issue for one part of the city or another part.
People kind of don't want to confess to that, but when you talk to them, you find out that they might have a little bit of food at the table in a sense, but they're not getting it all the way there. They're not what we would call at the Department of Agriculture food secure, where every meal is a good meal.
One of the things that we need to think about is, in the wealthiest nation in the world, is it reasonable to think that someone who works full-time should be able to have a decent life? And that would mean that they could provide their own food.
We've been doing great things. We've been working really hard. We're distributing millions of additional pounds of food in response to this current crisis. But our ability to continue to do that, to grow at that pace, is unlikely.
Thank you all for being with us here today. I want to start this conversation about hunger with you, David. You know, we often have this image of hunger as folks lined up outside a food pantry on a gritty urban street. And, you know, we think these folks are all homeless. Are hungry people homeless people?
At my food pantry, we see more people who are underemployed or unemployed or who work full-time needing food because their paychecks, if they're working, just don't go far enough anymore.
Lee, is that your experience too?
Absolutely. We actually serve at the storehouse very few homeless people. There's some other organizations in the city that do an incredibly good job of that. The quintessential customer at the storehouse is a female, mid to late 30s, couple of kids, husband's working minimum wage 10 hours a day, and they're not making it.
Yeah.
Melody, you work with organizations all over the state. Is this the same kind of thing you hear?
Absolutely. Only about 13% of the hungry people in New Mexico are homeless, which means that the vast majority of people are, you know, people who look like everybody else. They work, they struggle to make ends meet. You know, they have budgets that are impossible. Children, nearly half of the people who benefit from food pantries across the state are our state's children.
And so you work with Roadrunner. How is a food bank different from, you know, what David does?
Well, we supply our food not to individuals. We supply our food to other organizations. Hundreds of other organizations across the state get food from us. So we would supply food, part of the food that David's organization needed to feed those families would come from us.
And it's almost sort of a business. You guys actually pay for that food, but what does that amount look like that you pay to Roadrunner?
Well, last year I think I spent $67,000 at Roadrunner Food Bank, and I think it averaged out somewhere between 25 and 30 cents a pound on the average. Some things are cheaper and some things are more expensive. I'll give you a good example. I just found out that a case of peanut butter, which we used to pay $12 for this year and last year, has now gone up to $25 a case.
So you guys pay a much lower price than the food would cost through Roadrunner.
Yes.
But your expenses have gone up at Roadrunner, and that gets passed on. Is that right?
60% of the food that we distribute at the food bank is totally free. We give that away. There are real costs associated with the free food, and for example, fuel. You know, a lot of this food comes into New Mexico. We bring it in from other places in the United States, And when I first started at Roadrunner, we could bring, for example, a truckload of food from Oklahoma City, which is where a fair amount of it comes from. We could bring it here for a freight bill of $250, and that freight bill is now $2,500. Once those freight costs go up, or any cost really, once they go up, they stay up. And then of course we're subject to things like, peanut crop failure. Well, we have no control over what happens with the peanut crop, but what it does is, we've been trying to find good prices for peanut butter everywhere in the country. We've been shopping it nationally and we can't find any.
Krista, at the collaboration, you work with a lot of these organizations too. What are they telling you they need help with?
Many of the organizations are here in this room who we are working with on a daily basis. Many of them need resources. They need resources for outreach. They need resources to buy food. They need resources to actually help their individuals that they're serving access the food as well.
They need volunteers to help.
Correct, yes.
They need people to give food, maybe drive trucks around, things like that.
Right. And really having the ability to purchase the food is a big part of it as well. Many of the federal funding sources are being cut, and so they're looking at how they're going to make up for the difference in that budget cut.
Last year, the Emergency Food and Shelter Program allocated $250,000 to Bernalillo County to help fight hunger, to house people on a temporary basis. And this year, because the national board experienced a 40% cut in funding at the national level, our county wasn't poor enough to receive any funding. And that affected us, it affected the storehouse, I assume it affected y'all directly too.
Indirectly.
Indirectly. And then other direct feeding programs in the city that feed people, hot meal programs, places that provide shelter were affected by that loss of funds. So it was a significant hit. For my organization, it accounted for almost a third of my food budget from last year.
I think it's really interesting that anyone is saying that the metropolitan area is not poor enough to receive funds. In fact, there was just a Brookings Institute report that was released last week, and they are finding, for the first time since the 50s, a rise in what is called extreme concentrated poverty. 2 of those areas are in Albuquerque city limits. Extreme concentrated poverty means more than 40% of the people are living at 100% or below the poverty line.
And what is that number for the poverty line right now? Do you happen to know? Do you know, Alicia?
No.
It's
22,000.
22,000
for a family of 4.
Right. Right. So, that would apply to some of those families you're talking about. If you have one person working at minimum wage, that's a lot less than 22,000 supporting a family. It's easy to see how that could happen, especially in Albuquerque. Senator Sapien, you told us earlier that a lot of your constituents are having a hard time finding work. Everybody says, well, we just need to create jobs.
Right.
What are we supposed to do?
Well, and I think since this crisis began some 3 years ago, I think we're all finding it's very hard just to create jobs. Our larger challenge is really how as New Mexicans do we create the atmosphere that does bring in the industries that will provide good, clean, high-paying jobs to New Mexicans. And that does also go back to our educational system. Do we have the workforce that these industries are looking for? In my daily operation in my business, we've run into clients over the last 3 years who were your middle class, able to put food on the table households who, because of this crisis, have lost their jobs. And now they're not only coming in to see us to hopefully keep their risks down and keep their insurance, but they're also going across the street to the local Baptist church that has a food giveaway every Tuesday. And just to reiterate what some are saying, it's not the homeless. The people who are coming across the street, and the Baptist church is very gracious for putting this on every Tuesday, but the people who are showing up for the food, they're not walking up. They are driving up. So it's not your homeless, it is the working poor. And we need, as New Mexicans and policymakers, somehow find that edge where we can increase the available jobs out there, but also the available income so that we're not just working at the local fast food restaurants. We also have our constituents making above the poverty level.
My district's in Northeast Heights, and I agree with the senator, is that hunger knows no geographical boundaries, knows no socioeconomical anything. So it's a problem that we face here in New Mexico. And my background is agriculture, and what bothers me, as I was talking to Lee, is that we produce some of the best agricultural crops everywhere from pecans and peanuts to cattle, sheep, corn, and chili, and we can't get it out to the people that are hungry, that need it.
You know, this is a problem. Sherry Hooper from the Food Depot in Santa Fe couldn't make it here today, but when I talked to her recently, she said one of their biggest problems in Santa Fe and in northern New Mexico is cold storage. They just don't have enough room to store things that people have given them. And there are growers in northern New Mexico who want to give the Food Depot food, but she's had to turn some of it away. Terry, is this something you guys work on?
I think what we're all getting into here is how complex this entire equation is, from the agricultural producer onto the plate. All the different links in that chain have to be there for you to get access to good food. So you need cold storage. You need facilities that can distribute the food. You need better produce on convenience store trucks. You need a way for your agricultural producers to be able to keep producing. We see less and less of our agricultural lands in production now, and we really don't have a system by which we're bringing in new farmers to produce. And so what's gradually happened is an eroding of this chain, and that's why you have people missing meals, kids, not getting a full nutritious meal at dinner. More and more people are applying for our SNAP program. And we've seen a 40% increase over last year in the SNAP program.
That's food stamps?
And that's food stamps, essentially. And only 8% of the people that are on food stamps are on the welfare system. And that used to be 40% back in 1990. So what we see now is that more and more people, because of our economic situation, are being driven to this situation with hunger and low access to food. But then also we're losing crucial infrastructure that's necessary for the distribution of food. Our small communities don't have grocery stores anymore, and they're very often driving out. If you're in a rural community like Vaughan, New Mexico, you're driving 30 miles to Santa Rosa to go to the supermarket, and that's tough. And so at USDA, what we're all about is not only the nutrition side, but also strengthening the economy and the economics behind this whole issue, and then also looking for those community partnerships that you have through food pantries and agricultural producers, cooperatives, all sorts of things, to make sure they have what they need to get high quality produce and meat on the table. We have everything we need here. The representative is actually absolutely right. We can produce a lot in New Mexico, but we're not. And we have to do a better job of linking up all those different elements. I think that's what's most important.
Let me go back to the cold storage issue. You know, if I needed another fridge at my house, I could buy a new one for maybe $700, or I could get one, out of the paper for $100 or $200. But for the kind of storage that, say, the Food Depot needs, or for another cooler over at the Food Project, how much does that cost?
Well, we're talking, I work with a food co-op in Tucumcari, and they currently get their produce from California. It goes from California to La Montanita Co-op. They drive in their trucks from Tucumcari and pick it up in Albuquerque at the co-op and drive it back out to Tucumcari and distribute it to the members of the co-op. If they just had about $80,000, maybe $120,000, they could get the kind of commercial cooler that they need, so that they didn't have to do this crazy dance of driving out to Albuquerque every week to pick up the produce for their food co-op. So it's little investments like that. We're not, in these small communities, at least from what I see, you don't have to put $10 million out there. You have to find that important linchpin that's going to keep them going. So that might be, you got to help a community organization build a facility or get cold storage, or you're going to have to help somebody buy a truck or something like that.
$80,000 seems like an unreachable goal for some of these smaller outfits.
We even at the state level have some state programs that if it's a public entity that is formed like the Tucumcari group, that's established, we can go through the Mortgage Finance Authority and a couple of others to get basically interest-free loans to do these things. But in some cases, in rural New Mexico, not just northern, but in total rural New Mexico, there's not the organizational infrastructure to start with.
And we have the same types of programs, and he's absolutely right in that you don't have the capacity out there to figure out how to do this. People are on their own and trying to address these very complex issues in small communities, and it's tough out there.
So what do we need to do?
Well, I think that in some cases there are some efforts to overcome this. And for instance, I know at the South Valley Economic Development Center, where they have a commercial kitchen, there are local producers who are able to use that kitchen for a small fee with the purpose of getting things to market.
You know, Gwyneth, if I may, the legislature this last session, we passed legislation that did mandate that if you're going to sell chili in New Mexico, you have to say where it's from.
Do you guys give away chili?
Occasionally, we had some this summer because of Roadrunner. They had some that they passed on to us.
Do your clients get excited about that?
Oh yeah, they love it. Oh, well, and the other place we got it from is we have a community garden in Corrales called Seed to Need that grew chili for us this year. And that was exciting. People loved it, and they loved getting the fresh vine-ripened tomatoes that are grown just up the road. You know.
We you know, there's a lot of enthusiasm for community gardens that give food away to hunger relief organizations. But Melody, how much could that help?
You know, everything helps, and we are. I think the whole issue of capacity is. I think really that's kind of the key to all of this. We just have a lack of capacity in our state that kind of holds us back. We don't have organization that is consistent across the state. We have whole communities where they don't even talk to each other within those communities, and so I think if we develop some capacity, then I think you'll see things like community gardens growing in lots of communities across the state. We actually need in our biggest year ever, we distributed 10 million pounds of produce. And that was only the beginning of what we could have done.
Do you guys have a problem when you get fresh produce donated? Do you have a problem getting it out fast enough before it goes bad?
Not really, not anymore. We could distribute, I really believe, 20 or 30 million pounds of produce if we had it. And there is a great need for that in New Mexico because we have such a high incidence of diet-related disease and poor diet-related disease. And so if we could really somehow figure out how to have the capacity to ramp up the distribution of fresh produce, especially out into these rural communities, that would be huge.
What's the missing link? Is it
money.
Someone to? I mean, what do you need the money to do, though?
We need the money to transport it. We need the money to store it. The key with produce obviously is rapid distribution. So you can't just bring it in and then think about the distribution later. You have to have a very rapid distribution system, really to the point. If we were going to distribute 30 million pounds, we would have to be what we call cross-docking it, which means it would have to be going out at the same time it was coming in continuously. And we would love to have that problem, but some of it would come from out of state. There's that freight cost. It really is about money.
I think another link there that could be easily achieved is if people who grow food would partner directly with a distribution site like us, like the storehouse, like any other pantry, and then the food doesn't have to go to Roadrunner and then come to us and go directly to the Rio Grande Food Project or whatever organization is distributing that food. We have 3 community gardens that do that for us, and I wish we had 300 community gardens because we would distribute the food and people love getting the fresh produce that way, and then we're taking out a whole transportation link. I think that's a direct way that people in New Mexico could start helping with the hunger problem. If they have a garden, come bring your when August hits and nobody will talk to you about zucchinis and tomatoes, come see me or any other food pantry in the city. They would love to get your produce.
I had an eggplant situation this summer. I should have called you.
It's interesting that when you roll this conversation around in your mind, we're not really talking about food. We're talking about food-related subjects, but not about food. We're talking about a creaky, disorganized infrastructure, and that's the real problem. I'm one of those guys that believes there's a lot of food out there that we just don't really have our hands around how to do that. At the storehouse, if I ask each of you what business we are in, you'd probably say we're in the business of giving away food. That's not a business, that's a charity. So what the business we're really in is finding that stuff in the first place and figuring out how to get it into the storehouse in a woefully small building. We have 11,000 square feet, and it's not nearly large enough. We have one walk-in cooler, 12 by 24. That's it. So it's infrastructure. It's trucks. It's electricity. It's all those things that people don't relate to hunger when they give you a basket of tomatoes.
So you'd rather have a basket of cash?
Absolutely.
If we could.
What I wanted to mention, Gwyneth, was thinking about what's being said here is we have a project with the San Juan chapter of the Navajo Nation and the farmers up there, and they came to us at USDA because their farmers all on the highway from Farmington to Shiprock were letting produce rot in the fields at the end of the season because they didn't know how to get it from the field into cold storage, to treat it properly so it can be put out for sale or distribution or whatnot. And so we're trying to work with them to teach them how to form an agricultural co-op so they can buy the necessary equipment and maybe get some distribution in there, maybe get an office manager who's got the capacity to apply for grants or whatnot. But there's food left in the fields, and we've got to find a way to tackle that problem, and it does take money and capacity building. I mean, in a lot of cases, if you're working with one of our organizations, the state or the feds or nonprofits, you have to fill out grant applications to get money. And we are running into people all the time who say, I don't want to fill out an application, or I don't know how to, and I need someone to sit with me and do it. And so we've got to, I think, as a community, get behind this idea and help everybody out. I was amazed by the number of people that are on the SNAP program. I think it's up to more than 400,000 right now in New Mexico, which is a quarter of our population. So people need to think in terms of that person 3 doors down from their house might not be getting a full meal at night. And it's that close to us. And so we have to be active in trying to do something about it.
So if there are programs that the state has and there are programs that you have, I mean, could we use volunteers to sit with them and help fill out those grant applications? I mean, if there's money available.
But there has to be that commitment at the community to sustain it. The infrastructure we have throughout New Mexico is our public schools. But as Lee was saying, if you have cold storage there, and they all do, it's not just a matter of plugging in and make sure the plug's in the wall. Is there a backup? Because when we have severe weather, sometimes that goes out, and if you don't have that backup, you lose all the food. So there has to be that commitment at the community to want to do this. And if you have that, then, and I've worked with Ona, you can do lots of things.
One of the things we need to think about are what are the models that work in a rural state, because there are real challenges, as have been pointed out. But in our Assets Consortium, for instance, we have 31 community-based organizations, and those organizations are from community colleges to indigenous farmers. And we train and certify family development specialists and finance coaches for those folks and deliver asset products and services to hundreds of people, thousands of people across the state.
What's an asset product?
Well, an asset product, that's a good question. An asset product is actually something that allows a family to sustain themselves and prepare for the future.
Is it a basket of cash?
It is not, but it is, well, it is and it is not. In our assets program, one of the primary products there is a thing that's called individual development accounts. And individual development accounts are match savings accounts. And families who have earned income in their homes make less than 200% of poverty are eligible to participate. They complete 10 weeks of comprehensive financial education, and then they're eligible to save their own money. Right? When they reach $1,000, which is usually their goal, it could be less than that, but it's usually $1,000, we match them 4-to-1 for the purchase of a first home, to capitalize a small business, or for higher education. And in all of those asset purchases, for instance, the center was talking about the difficulty of developing jobs. We've had 147 businesses started in the last 3.5 years, and over 400 jobs created in that approach. The cost has been $6,700 per job. And that, on anybody's measure, is a very low cost of creating that. And what we're doing is really having families become self-sufficient so that they can contribute to who needs food instead of being in the food pantries. But the point of this is that it is a network that works in New Mexico. And it means that we centralize the management, much like Roadrunner does, and that we train and develop capacity at the local level. But the other thing is, we pay them to do the work. Because the best idea in the world is just a good idea if it has no capacity.
So is there an existing organization that has the potential to pick up some of these missing links, helping organizations like, say, the Co-op in Tucumcari go through the process of applying for some of these grants or trying to get the money?
Well, there is and there isn't. We lack a lot of that institutional kind of network that some states have. If you go to the Midwest, every small town's got a dairy co-op or a grain co-op or something like that. We don't have that tradition. We have groups out there, but they typically are more centered in the medium to large towns, in Roswell and Portales and Las Cruces and Silver City. And we don't have a lot of infrastructure in between those areas. So I meet regularly with mayors from towns that have 100 people. And they have a mayor and a town clerk, and that's it. And they have a lot of needs. And there's not a nonprofit located in that community. I met with the mayor of Elida not too long ago, and they gave me 4 things they needed. They needed a senior center, and they needed a few other things. And I said, well, we've got these grants at the federal government. And they said, well, it's just me and the clerk here. We can't manage a bunch of federal grants. And so they really need that help, and typically they're looking towards that large regional city for a nonprofit or somebody that's going to come to their aid.
Grants, Gwyneth, are another interesting bunch in New Mexico. Historically, they've been around for a long time, and a while ago at the legislature, we allowed them to become municipal subdivisions and create their own infrastructure. There's a lot out there, and that could be available to be used for a lot of things.
And sometimes it's just a small thing that helps a community get that spark to help itself, and it really has to start locally. The communities themselves have to because sustainability has to come from the community. But I was involved with a group several years ago, and we gave some really small grants, for example, to Fort Sumner. But a handful of people in Fort Sumner really seized on that money and made it work. They thought of some very strategic uses for that money, and then pulled together the whole community. And they were able to get a business there. They were able to create jobs. They were able to have renewed civic pride in what they were able to do as a community, and it was a thing of beauty.
I agree that's really an important part, and the create capacity is an important part also. So it does need to be sustained by community, and it doesn't need to be directed by any of us, but it does need to be developed.
I absolutely agree with that. One of the things that we're working with on the collaboration level is that there's not any one approach that's going to work for each community. It's working with those communities to establish what approach is going to work for them to address hunger issues within their area. And I believe it's a diversified approach. It's not one approach that's necessarily going to work.
No matter what we do, though, in terms of relieving hunger, we're not going to fix it. Right? I mean, we've all talked about how the problem isn't that they can't get down to the storehouse or the food depot or the food project. The problem is poverty. Right. So what do we need to do to fix that problem?
Well,
Alicia?
I just wanted to share, hunger is a major symptom of a larger problem, which is poverty and which is income inequality. What we need to do is really prioritize our tax and budget system, especially in this state. It's about choices. We can make choices to continue to cut, and we've heard about budget cuts around here. I heard you talking about federal cuts and how it impacts your programs. We've also heard about jobs and how to create jobs. Well, what we do know is that budget cuts have cut the very programs that are helping this group of people. It's cutting child care assistance to people who are trying to get back to work or stay employed. It's cutting programs and services that benefit these families. And I think that we need to look at that as a larger issue and set our priorities. Do we want to continue to let the super rich pay less in taxes while the working class pay more and they're the ones suffering the most? Do we want corporations to receive tax breaks, or do we want to fund these programs that benefit families, that would get them to work, that would help provide solutions to food insecurity? And I think that the solution to me is very clear. I think that that's what we're seeing with all of the movements going around the country, is that folks are tired of the wealth and the trickle-down effect that is supposed to have been occurring, where really we've just been seeing the wealth gushing upward as opposed to trickling downward.
Jimmy, are you on board with all that?
Not necessarily. At the state level, I feel spending got completely out of control. And yes, we have had to cut, but as I've been watching the state's budget, and Senator Sapien is on the Senate side, I'm on the House Appropriations, I've not gotten the feel that we're going to have to cut programs again, Alicia. Maybe flat, but in this day and age, that may be a win for everyone. When you sit on appropriations, either House or Senate, and you come up with a bill, and you have the school children, you have the DD waivers, you have the mentally ill, you have the deaf, you have the blind. There are so many needs out there that just one thing of maybe taxes is not going to do it, nor is, I don't think, budget cuts. But the bottom line is to figure out the proper relationship to grow the economy so that we do put more people back to work. And I'm willing to work on that part of it, roll my sleeves up, and get into it, because when we grow the economy and we have more people paying taxes at whatever level, then I think that's how we're going to ultimately dig out of the hole that we're in.
One of the struggles we've been having with at the LFC, the Legislative Finance Committee, which is our interim budget committee, is prioritization. And I think one of the challenges we run into, or really, is to look at it from, it's kind of like I do when I talk to my clients about their budgets. They're in tons of credit card debt, and they want to get out of it tomorrow, but it took them 5 years to get in that credit card debt. I think we have to start looking at our challenges as a state, short-term and long-term. We can't afford to cut the daycare programs, because those are the students that need the most care. Those are the ones that at early childhood we know that that's the biggest impact we can make on the educational system. So we can't cut those programs, but if we don't start prioritizing our money better, then the long term will never take effect. At the same time, if we do concentrate on a long-term approach, prioritizing some of our money now to that early childhood education piece, and I think Alicia is touching on it with the child care side of the game, is that we then, I call it, build a better product. Our 0 to 5 children, once they hit K through 12, are better prepared to learn at a higher level. And as we go through, and granted it's 20 years down the road, but we now have a better work product, a better worker in New Mexico, which will expand that industry, which will hopefully bring in higher wages. That's the long-term approach. The short-term approach is kind of tough.
Well, I'm going to ask you a tough question. So in the short term, can we get more money, and where can we get it from as a state? Is it possible?
I don't know that there's a bigger bucket out there. The farmers market in Corrales and the farmers market in Bernalillo, they've had no government assistance. They are just farmers who have a crop, who have come together because It's the community of Corrales, the community of Bernalillo, and they've sustained it and they've grown it. The fact that you didn't know about where to take your extra squash, I think is part of the problem. I think we have a lot of constituents out there who are in that middle class and above who don't realize that poverty is next door. Poverty is Mary and Joe who live next door, who are living check to check, who show up at the Baptist Church in Bernalillo because they don't have enough money to feed their kids.
Which brings me to my original point about like corporate tax breaks, for instance. The jobs that Senator Sapien said that were created by the farmers market, the jobs that were created by what Ona was referring to, they didn't receive millions of dollars in tax breaks to create jobs in New Mexico. They created jobs in New Mexico, and not at the expense of funding programs that we're talking about here today. I would never want to have to make the choice. That's why I think the legislators are in those positions between funding a DD waiver program and something else. But I know that you can make a choice between making, say, out-of-state corporations pay their taxes on income profits made in our state. It has showed that they are going to continue to be here. We're going to continue to have out-of-state corporations in New Mexico. They're going to continue to have high profit margins, which we've seen. Profits for some of these companies have grown in the last several years when we're in the Great Recession. But yet we continue to make the choice to cut programs and services that benefit children and families. Education, we have larger classrooms, we have fewer teachers. Child care assistance programs have been cut. Some of these food assistance programs have been cut. To me, it's about prioritizing your choices. We do have very clear choices, and I think it's interesting for folks to feel really good. It's really good to donate to these programs, and it happens a lot, I know you know, around this time of year to donate to food pantries and such. We would hope that we wouldn't have that type of need. If we could really get at the infrastructure problem, we would hope that food pantries would only be a necessity in times of crisis. But unfortunately, New Mexicans have been in a time of crisis for many, many years now.
I mean, I think going back to hunger, I think that as the wealthiest nation in the world, are we going to let this situation be acceptable? And the answer as a society is no. And so that's a choice we have to make, that we are going to attack this issue and do something about it. And we're not going to want to see the erosion of the safety net, which is helping all these people get through these economic tough times. And that's been the commitment of the Obama administration, the USDA, is how do we address it on the short term? But long term, how as a society are we going to succeed economically if our students can't get a proper meal, if families can't feed the kids at the table? And these are things those are the choices we have to put at the forefront. This hunger issue, demonstrates our commitment as a society as to what we want to do about one of the worst issues out there, and we have to solve it. And Alicia's right in that we have to make the right choices as a group of people. And I think far too often what we've been doing is throwing these choices out to our legislators and saying, you figure it out. But we really, as a community, and what I'm hearing here today is these small communities, large communities have to get together and address the problem. And they have to be willing to come to the table to do it. It can't be forced upon them, and they can't be made to do it. They've got to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and attack it, because the alternative just isn't acceptable.
The bootstraps have to be provided, though.
Yes.
And in New Mexico, you talked about volunteers. I don't think in Elida there are many volunteers. Everybody that's able to work is working, and they're still having a hard time making ends meet. And when we talk about, for instance, the Corrales events that happen every Sunday, fabulous. I go there often. But they are supported by public policy. We decided that we could use our SNAP vouchers at the markets, and that was a great boon for the markets. It was very important. It was also important for the people who are using that, because they had access to fresh food. So all of these things are very interconnected, and yes, there are short-term and long-term answers. But in respect to, for instance, the point that Alicia is raising about corporate taxes, not only does it disadvantage our state when large corporations are operating in our state at no cost to them, but it also disadvantages all our small businesses. They have to compete and they have to pay those taxes. And that is really unfair. And we need to get back to a time of fairness in our society and think about that as a filter for decision making. What is economic justice? And as Terry's saying, Are we really going to allow the wealth gap in America to be 97th in the world behind such countries as China and Iran? That, from my perspective, that is un-American.
Furthermore, the income inequality in our state, we have the highest number of millionaires in Los Alamos, and then we're hearing about the huge food insecurity problem we're having in the rest of the state. I think that we really need to evaluate our priorities, and it's going to start with these kinds of conversations.
Lee, I'm thinking, what do you hear from your clients? What do they need? I mean, they probably aren't saying to you, I'd really like to see Walmart pay taxes on the profits it earns here instead of calculating its profits. I'm sure that's not what they say. What do they want?
They want food. They want food, and they need jobs. And we can bandy these things around like tennis balls until we're just weary. But Alicia used a word a minute ago that we have been bandying about at the storehouse called movement. And until there is a movement, when the people say, I'm just sick and tired of this, it's got to stop. And that will happen sooner or later. They just haven't settled. They've settled on economics. There's a movement about Wall Street and the bankers and all that sort of thing. When it gets around to hunger, you're going to find more people by a factor of 100 involved in that. And until that happens, we might just keep on talking.
I think one of the things that was brought up earlier that is extremely important is that we're not only looking at existing sources, but looking at ways that we can leverage those sources that are there. There are billions of pounds of food being thrown away every day in America, and many of the organizations sitting right here are doing food recovery. And they are going out into local supermarkets, public schools, restaurants, and hotels and recovering food that is existing and already there, and also in agricultural production. How can we look at building that structure to support organizations in feeding people the food that is already there?
If we take government out of play, Americans will come to the aid of each other. We just have to educate them on how they can be helpful. And it's not always by the dollar. It's by finding those resources that are already in existence and bringing them together. It's just phenomenal how you guys can run these organizations on a shoestring budget, but if we concentrate on the ground level on our communities, educating the people who have to be able to say, if you do have that extra squash or that extra produce, how do we get it in the hands of the people that are helping the people with most need? The question of money is always going to be there.
And there are 50 million Americans hungry. 50 million. That is, if we had a disease that affected 50 million Americans and it caused the kinds of symptoms that hunger causes and the kind of long-term detriment to human beings that hunger causes, there would be a huge public outcry saying, let's put an end to this. We can't have 50 million Americans with this disease, but we have it, and we are not hearing that outcry, and we have to. It is totally unacceptable in this country to have 50 million Americans hungry.
Well, the one thing we can do is educate folks who are watching today about what we're doing here in New Mexico. And I want to thank all of you for coming in and sharing your stories with us and with our viewers.
Thank you.
Being part of this conversation is always important. And I think the thing that is most important to understand is that the answers are complex, but they're within our reach.
If your neighbor can't afford to put food on the table, we should all know about that. And I think that's the key, is making sure everybody knows that hunger is alive and well. And that's the travesty in this day and age.
50 million people hungry. We had 8 people die from a melon thing, and the country went nuts. People died. But people are dying in this country every day from malnutrition.
In this state, we provide about $5 million a year that goes towards that food assistance. We know where these food banks are, and we probably could do a better job of connecting people with that. I don't know if it's through the internet or what it might be, but I think there is something there that we could be doing.
What the conversation today will do come the legislative session is definitely drive me to protect those programs that help the neediest.
Policymakers need to be both informed and pressured to do the right thing. And we need to address our tax structure. People don't want to do that. But the truth is we can't continue to have 300% increase in CEO salaries, while workers get a 4% increase in the same period of time. That creates poverty.
I think private citizens, they take the lead, then government can come in and play a very helpful role. But again, it has to be that local community, that local spark, local spirit that gets the movement going.
I think one great thing people could do is partner with their local community organizations, communicate with your agencies that are addressing hunger, and engage yourself in that.
It always comes down to food and money. The food is already here. We have to find it, and we have to take that finding to a level that goes beyond that can of pork and beans you found in Grandma's closet.
Donations are great because in my organization, for every dollar you give me, I can buy $3.50 worth of food. But I think the other important thing is to volunteer and see the face of hunger, because you will be surprised who shows up at the door, and it's not what most people think.
There's something that every single person who is listening to this can do to help.
I know as a people that we care about each other and that we have to rise up together. And there's no other way to think about it than that we need to help each other. And this is the way to do it. Let's get involved, let's help each other, and let's make this community great.
Join us for Public Square on the last Thursday of every month. Our December show will be about childhood obesity. To participate in Public Square and for more information, go to our website, knme.org/Public Square. Here you can give us feedback or suggest topics for the show. Also look for us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching.